This is a really brief meditation that I wrote the 12th day of June in 2004, and not surprised, given that the time of year between my older daughter's birthday in May and my younger daughter's birthday, which was yesterday in June, coupled with the end of the school year, the end of the academic year, it's just always a crazy time for me. And committed as I was to writing every day, which is what I'm commemorating with these daily videos, there were days where, quite frankly, I sat down and I had to squeeze water from the proverbial rock, as the saying goes. And as much as I would like to suggest that the writing that is very repetitive is such because of any number of philosophical reasons, there are also very practical human reasons why they are repetitive, and it's because not only did it take me time often to get into the writing, but oftentimes I just found myself repeating lines as if I were doing an exercise, which is what I've talked about and written about, and just didn't get beyond the exercise point, right? Didn't get beyond the stretching, didn't get beyond the warm-up. And I think this is one case. Now, having said that, let me read what I wrote and then see if there's something. In the notes that I wrote at the top of this original printout that ultimately became material for pages 199 and 200 in Being and Learning in Chapter 8, I wrote, "The ontological appearance / unfolding of the learning community. Thus, we see that the heeding of the Thus, we see that the heeding of the invocative invitation, the authentic response to the appeal of language, is the heeding of the guiding directive of wisdom, the heeding which is the enjoyment of intersubjective gathering, that is poetic dwelling. The ineffable makes its appearance with the experiential or phenomenological nature of learning, with the relational gathering of the learning community in peace and freedom. This appearance is not represented, but rather is the poetic dwelling of the learning community. The ineffable makes its appearance with the dialogic arrangement of the many, as the gap that opens up between the many and establishes the condition for the actuality of the reciprocation of evocative saying and painstaking listening. This gap shelters the excess, the remainder, what is always already beyond and not yet expressed. This gap preserves the meaning to be made in the reception and response to that which exceeds and remains to be taken up. As we have seen, the gap is revealed in the evocative first questions, in the pointing that conveys the unfathomable abyss, the nothing. The appearance of the ineffable thus coincides with the dialogic gathering that is the learning community. But the appearance of this community, the embodiment of openness, is directed by the sage, the one who remains steadfastly open, who is constantly prepared to guide the dialogic enjoyment, ready for the unforeseen. To be ready for the unforeseen is to be poetic, to be released into openness, but this releasement is the result of the devotion to learning and to the diminishing of the action, the emptying of the ego. Thus, the emergence of the learning community follows from the directive, guiding of the sage, the teacher who lets learning be learned, whose guidance directs the building of the poetic dialogue, poetic dwelling, which we now understand as the care for being. Quote, "Without the original revelation of the nothing, no selfhood, no freedom." This original revelation is the arrival of the guiding directive that is received by the sage in her meditative practice, that releases her into the openness where she abides. To abide is to stand ready for, and to stand up under, endure or undergo. To endure without yielding, and thus to be or remain fixed in some state or constant in some relation. The devotion to learning and to the Tao, identified by Lao Tzu, is precisely the abiding indicated by Heidegger. And meditative thinking is this devotion to learning that manifests in the building of poetic dwelling, the cultivation of peace and freedom, that is the arduous labor of the many enjoying together. This is what Heidegger indicates when using the boundless boundary, the shelter that conserves freedom, the enchanted, mysterious region of peace. Heidegger calls this way the path of silence. Thus, to be devoted to learning is to practice meditative thinking, to be or to remain fixed or constant in the relationship with the Tao, to be enjoined with a community who wanders along this path of silence, where, quote, the truth of being comes to language, by way of poetic dialogue. To be devoted to learning is to abide in meditative thinking, to be reposed in openness itself that gathers the many into a unity, a regioning of freedom, or letting be. Quote, openness itself is that which regions, into which we are released by way of waiting when we think. And that's how it ends. The only commentary I'd make here in the video, and then I'll be writing a commentary on my blog where I'm gathering all these videos, Duarte being learning on Blogger. The only comment I would make is that I sure wish that I'd started with those quotations, or that quotation from Heidegger, because it seems to me that a strategy that I might have used and that I would possibly use if I was going to write, if I'd do this experiment again. The one thing I'm noticing is, and I'm surprised that I didn't catch myself, although I think I know why I did this, but I think that quotations really offer a great prompt, and what I should have perhaps thought to do was to have a more exegetical approach, right, which is a more classical, philosophical approach, being that I'm including so many quotations, right? So it would be one thing if there were no quotations at all, and it was just kind of pure phenomenology, that is to say, all description and writing. But insofar as I am using citations or quotations, it would seem to me that I should have probably, or I would have, I shouldn't say should have probably, were I to do it again, or were I to, do it again, which means to do it in another way. Rather, if I were to undertake the experiment again, I would start each day with a quotation. And I think that insofar as I may continue doing this blog beyond February 2015, if I do that, I might do that with the prompts. At any rate, so I'll leave it at that. That's what I wrote 10 years ago today. And I'm commemorating it 10 years later on this day, the 12th day of June, 2014, a material originally written on June 12th, 2004, part of a year-long experiment of writing each day for a minimum of 1 hour, and ultimately all of that was published in this book here, Being and Learning, a poetic phenomenology of education. And the material that I just read is in Chapter 8, pages 199 to 200.